Hello and welcome to this week's review of My Hero Academia. This week I'm reviewing the episode Light Fades to Rain. I've got the window open to see if you hear any weird noises, that's where that's coming from. Also, I didn't get a whole lot of sleep last night. I've got a bit of a sore back due to DIY stuff, so let us cheer ourselves up by talking about the positives of this episode, all the things that I enjoyed, and we kick off with the headline positives. And I have to say that this was a decent action episode with some really great animation within it. It had a neat look into a side character that we weren't really seeing much of, really at all. Some interesting teases for stuff that's coming down the pipeline with Tomura later on, and pretty much everything that we got with Bakugo, which I think is going to be the stuff that a lot of the people watching this episode is going to be talking about. We'll kick off by talking about the action and the animation, which I think that both were good. I will admit I don't think that they were consistently good. There were some parts and sequences which I quite honestly think looked way better than others, but overall the quality was very high. The highs were just brilliant little bits. I'm not going to go into detail on them, but you know what parts of me talking about, and the low points were just kind of mid at worst, just standard television animation stuff, and it's fine. I don't want to sound like I'm ragging on it in the positives, because I really don't want to. I think that the best, most immediately fantastic visual imagery at the moment that comes to mind is the stuff to do with Bakugo and his emotional state, with that being in that moment midway in the early part of the episode where he looks like he's in a state of shock before eventually switching out to a determined yet psychotic focus, which itself then pivots rather fantastically into the action that we end up getting into the latter half of the episode, with him just zipping around the arena and blasting Tomura right in the face. There was a part of me that's wondering that there's a lot of people watching that are going to be thinking, oh wow, his quirk's awakening, this is going to be the turning point of the fight, at least until it isn't, and then the lead character comes along to save the day, which is kind of what ended up happening in a weird way. Well, not in a weird way, that's literally what ended up happening, and we get a similar kind of interesting visual imagery, or at least on terms of the same quality of it, with this stuff where we had Tomura and Lemillion, and Lemillion making his remark about Tomura having no friends, and then we have that cut to the image of the younger version of Tomura surrounded by the hands just holding him down, and we have seen similar imagery to that in the previous series in terms of the shots that we get in the opening sequence. I think it might be the second opening sequence or the first, I really don't remember, as well as some of the other stuff similar to that we've seen there and then in the previous season. I think that this particular image of him just being surrounded by these hands holding him down is just this really brilliantly creepy, fascinating, arresting little image that I like. I think it's a really, like I say, it's a creepy, haunting image, and it does set up the things that we'll talk about later on. I will admit, though, that I am not a fan of the fact that Tomura is referring to the younger self like they're a different person. Because it ends up feeling to me a lot like the, oh, this is the moment where Walter White fully became Heisenberg, which that kind of comment kind of goes against the whole point of that particular series, and in fairness, that's not exactly what's going on here, because there are other elements to it, but talking about the younger self in that kind of way does kind of end up having that feel of they're trying to make a hard break between Tomura and his younger self, which I don't like when pieces of fiction do that. I really don't like that, but that's a discussion on a rant for a whole other time. The fact and the matter of the absence of friends is something that almost as soon as Tomura said that, almost as soon as Lemillion said that, I expected Tomura to start reaming off the names of members from the League of Villains. But didn't end up getting that, because I think that, you know, whilst that would have been an expected moment, there's a part of me that thinks it might have been a bit too cheesy, but also ends up showing just, I was going to say just what Tomura thinks of him, but at this point, it's not really Tomura, so you can't really say that he's not going to turn around and say, oh, those are my friends, because it's more like all for one at this point. There was a moment, however, when Lemillion said this whole thing of, well, after Tomura said, oh no, Makeito, whatever the name is, really likes me, they want to go on walks with me and hang out, and it's going to be super cool and stuff. I was expecting Lemillion to turn around and say something along the lines of, okay, and what would they think about all of this? You know, just the kind of thing that you'd expect to hear a superhero say when they find this kind of emotional weakness in someone and try and talk them down, which is something that we don't end up getting. Maybe it's the fact of seeing a lot of Doctor Who recently, because this feels like the moment where the Doctor was just kind of pushing on that particular weak point, try and stop the bad guy doing the bad thing, or it's the kind of thing that you expect Superman to do to stop the villain doing the bad thing, or Batman, or just about any other superhero. But also you can always turn around and say that, well, Lemillion still hasn't graduated from superhero school, so he doesn't know to do that yet, so you can kind of move away from it. Of course, If he did do that, well, that would get close to him actually saving the day, which is something we can't do because Midoriya has to be one to do that. But anyway, it does set up for an emotional vulnerability with Tomura, something that feels like it's setting up and foreshadowing for things later on, a friendship saving the day moment, which I know that certain members of the audience are going to be rolling their eyes off and vomiting into the stands about all of this. But I think, and as I mentioned in the past, I think that a friendship saves the day ending for this series, depending on how it's executed, is probably the best way you go about that, but I think that's a discussion for a whole other time. I think that the flashback sequences that we got with Nejire, or whatever her name is, were good. I will be blunt, I don't think that they were totally needed in the grand scheme of things, but, I mean, especially given how little she ultimately contributed to the episode, because at the end of the day, she just pretty much acted as a hype man for Sun Eater, and that's just about it. But I suppose that if she didn't have this little flashback sequence, what else would she have done in the episode? She would have just been a cheerleader for the two of the characters, two of the members of the big three. She wouldn't have actually really contributed anything of substance. Her job here would just be to fire laser beams and make the sandwiches during the break. I mean, I think the flashback sequence itself is neat. There is also this argument that whenever stuff like this comes along of, oh, they could have spent more time to build it up, give us a deeper dive into the character, but what else could they have done really to build that out more? Because if they built it out more, they would have made her more of the focus of the episode, and given where we are at this point in the story, this would ultimately have resulted in her just getting her ass kicked at the end of it. So, you know, a brief little thing like this is fine for building out her character, get us a little bit more emotionally invested in the character before she ultimately gets her ass kicked either way, but you know, it wasn't her episode. It was Tomura and Bakugo's episode, setting up for matters to do with them later on in the series. With Tomura, it's showing this tangible emotional weakness so that the friendship saves the day ending that might well end up coming at the end of this series has a little more of a practical credence. It's something that's set up well and ahead of time so that it doesn't feel like it's coming totally out of left field. You know, it ends up feeling like it's more of a legitimate weakness rather than just an arse pull by the writer because they want to say something when there isn't really the mechanics there with which to make anything like that work. With Tomura, it's also to end up showing just how much control the all-for jerk he now has over him, to the point that he refers to Tomura as being another person, both the present version that we know of him and also the past version that we end up seeing surrounded by the hands. And at this point, we are now seeing that he also has access to the memories of all-for jerky. I was admit, and there's a lot of things I've kind of subverted expectations here and there, which is ironic given something I'm going to talk about in just a little bit. I was expecting that they were going to end up revealing that Bakugo was a previous user of One for All. Like, we're going to have because he's got the guy, One for All's got the guy, All for One, I should say, has got the guy in his hands, and I was expecting they were going to turn up, they're going to raise the camera up and reveal that, no, it wasn't just this guy with pink hair, he actually had blonde hair, because it was Bakugo from the future, now in the past, for reasons yet unknown! And that wasn't the case, and I'm kind of glad with that, because there's a part of me that's still worried there's going to be some bullshit time travel stuff thrown into this series at some point in the future. Which, the only timey-wimey stuff you could end up doing is stuff with Eri, but I don't think people understand how her power works to really get that kind of time travel ending out of it. But hey, whatevs, I think that, you know, I liked that sequence itself, this stuff with Bakugo. I think all of it ultimately at the end of the day was about rounding off his character and setting up for the bait and switch. Like I mentioned previously, when he's having his bit whiz flicking around the arena, this is a moment where we're supposed to think, oh, his quirk's awakening, he's going a level beyond, he's become the legendary Super Bakugo, and he's now going to start kicking Tomura's ass, at least until such a time that Midoriya is starting to come onto the scene, and then Bakugo will get his ass kicked, and then Midoriya will save the day through truth, justice, and the way of friendship. We get that, but ultimately that doesn't end up happening because it's a bait and switch. I think that itself was interesting, though I will admit that I knew about this well in advance. For those who are new to the channel, or those who are new to these videos, I've had pretty much every single major plot point from Season 4 onwards, up until this point, spoilt for me. I knew that the Bakugo was going to get injured like this well in advance. I think I knew about it at least a year ago at this point. Almost exactly a year ago at this point, because you know, YouTube really loves spoiling this series for me. Well, not YouTube itself. YouTubers really love spoiling stuff from this series for me. So yeah, I knew about it ahead of time, but what I will say is that I really still enjoyed it all the same. People who have been watching my reviews for the past couple of weeks or so will know that, like I say, I knew about the reveal about Aoyama being the traitor ahead of time. And when that reveal came along, regrettably, it didn't have the same kind of emotional impact for me as it would have done had I gone into it fresh or been someone who's able to feign emotionality for the sake of YouTube clout, but that's a whole other discussion for all of a time. It didn't have quite the same kind of emotional impact for me because I knew about it well in advance, and of course, as I mentioned in my mid-season review, I don't think that it was really built out anywhere near as much as it should do. More time should have been spent to develop the whole mystery of the traitor, at least give it an extra couple of episodes before revealing it, but we're getting a little bit distracted now. With this stuff with Bakugo and with him being injured in the way that he was, that wasn't the case. Yes, I knew that it was coming up, but there's two things I did not know. One was how they were going to actually execute all of this, and two, when it was actually going to end up happening. So, when we see Bakugo flipping about, I was expecting, like I mentioned previously, oh, this is the bit where he does his fight back, and then he'll get his ass kicked, and then we'll get the, oh no, he's been hurt in his blank. Find out next week what he's been hurt in. I didn't know how they'd execute with the bit with the training card and the flashback sequences and him seeing the representation of All Might. I didn't know they were going to end up doing that. All I knew is that he was going to get injured in a really nasty way. Well, I know exactly how he's been injured, but we'll say that because I don't want to spoil it for anybody else. So all that stuff, the actual execution of it, the emotional execution of it, the creative side of it, that wasn't something that I knew about, and I think it was executed near perfectly. The animation in some parts could have been better, but I think that as a whole thing, it had the emotional impact that it really needed. Yes, I didn't know that it was coming this early. I thought it would come later. Maybe it would have been the thing to end this particular season if we're going to get into this season at all, but yeah, I think that was a great, fantastic moment. I just really wish that I hadn't had it spoilt for me ahead of time. Otherwise, you know, that could have been a really fantastic moment. Still, with that said, and whilst we have a little bit of negativity in the air, let us talk about the negatives. And I will admit that I don't really have any negatives as far as the episode itself is concerned. More so, look, we're going to have to get into a little bit of a nitpick here. I know that some people might not like it when I get into nitpicky stuff, but I like to do this in a little bit more balance. I don't want to just go into this thing to say everything was fine, everything was good, nothing was bad, because that's very rarely the case. But still, as far as Naked is concerned, I did not like the title for this episode. I think that it signposted what was going to happen in a very clumsy way. I mean, not in the literal sense of it going to rain or not, because you could always end up looking at this being more metaphorical, but the title itself gave it away that this was going to be a dark episode. I didn't see the preview for this week's episode, so I didn't know if this was going to be a dark reveal for the fate of Endeavour or a dark reveal for something else. And it was something else. Look, at the end of the day, it is a bit of a nitpick, and yes, it's a bit of an arty title, but I'll take an arty-farty title over a generic one. This episode could quite easily have been called something like The Revelation, The Reveal, The Sacrifice, The Unearthing, The Bloke, Hero, Rise of Legends. Just very generic, very bland, meaningless titles that don't mean anything because it's just a word salad of just very lofty words that are put together in a way that's supposed to sound smart, sophisticated, and philosophical. And in the end of the day, it just looks fucking stupid. Like pretty much every other major AAA video game title as of late, but that's a rant for another time. But still, the title itself does give it away, because it ultimately means that you're going into this episode thinking, okay, who's getting their ass handed to them? Who's dying? Who's getting crippled? Who's getting their bones broke? Who's losing the superpower? And at the end of the day, we get Bakugo getting hurt in his blank. So, you know, we'll see where all that ends up going, given the way this is all going. There's a part of me that's winning. Hang on a minute. No, wait. I was going to say, hang on a minute. Could this all end by the end of the season? It's not going to, but we're now going to pivot into the overview and say that I thought this episode was great. I think it was really fantastic. I think the only downside to it is the fact that the emotional impact once again was muted a little bit, given the fact I knew about this kind of stuff going into it. But even with that said, I still think they had a hell of a lot of impact. The stuff towards the end of the episode with Bakugo, I thought was fantastic. I thought it was good. There was a part of me that was worried that it was going to just start pivoting full force into anime bullshit territory with him flicking around the arena like something out of Dragon Ball. But that wasn't the case, because almost as soon as that started, he got absolutely walloped. Like, again, I didn't expect this stuff to be happening so soon, but I could say that about everything that's happened this season thus far. Everything that I've known about ahead of time has been stuff that I thought, oh, they'll do the Star and Stripe stuff for the first half of the season. The second half of the season will be the traitor stuff. Oh, they did both of them in the first half. Oh, they did them only 3 episodes away from one another. Oh no, what are we doing now? So, we'll see where all this is going. We'll see how they're able to pace all of this out. I've got a feeling that there's going to be at least one more series after this. Don't know what's going to be going on in that half of it, but I'm perfectly fine with it. I will admit there are some bits here and there that I still know about ahead of time, but it's mostly visual image stuff. I think there's only like one major plot point I still have in the back of my mind that's been spoilt for me, but outside of that, it's just neat visual images. It's stuff that doesn't really mean anything as far as story reveals is concerned. It's like, oh, you find out that Batman's got the Batmobile in the new movie. That's not a spoiler, that's just something that's like a 50-50 chance he's going to end up having. So, you know, it doesn't really change anything, the fact you know that it's in there going ahead of it. So, yeah, whatever. I think the episode is great. I think its episode is good. With that said, however, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner. Ow, my back! Oh, no. Anyway, let's move this on quickly so I can rest my back for a little bit. First comment comes from Big X1, who says, I love this one, it was worth the wait. This, of course, referring to last week's episode, Wounded Hero, Bright, Burning True and stuff, and that. Glad that you liked this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode just as much, because let's face it, I'm going to be honest, I think this is an episode that a lot of people are going to end up talking about for reasons which are pretty bloody obvious. Our next comment comes from Scott TV Gamer, who says, going into this season, that last scene with All Vaughn was the moment I was looking forward to the most. I'd love to clarify things, but I'll refrain from speaking about it for at least another week or two. But then the new opening showed that this season will adapt more than I thought, so this is now officially my second most anticipated moment. Thank you for your comment. I hope that whatever you're anticipating goes as well as you could possibly hope it would end up doing. I have not seen the opening for this year's season yet. I've not watched either of them. I think I'm going to have to come back to them after the fact once this season's reviewed in a few weeks' time. Or this season's ended in a few weeks' time. I think it ends in early October if I've done my maths out and there's no other breaks coming down the pipeline. And now I need to think about what I'm going to end up doing as like a Halloween-y thing. And I also need to start working on the Christmas video, start collecting things for that. That feels like it should be a tease, but you know that it's going to end up coming and you can kind of guess what it's going to end up being. But anyway, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought about this particular episode, and I'll talk to you again next week. See you next time. Goodbye. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!